See him a beast when he hear that sound like yeah, beat on the beat when he hear that sound like woo. Yeah, bitch and the champ only need one round like ha. Yeah, me, I'm a G bring heat in the sound like
Mike Owens here, and today I'm joined by Gerald Meerschaert, who returns to action, UFC 287, facing Joe Pyfer. Gerald, always a pleasure to get some time with you. How are things with you today?
I'm doing good, man. Like we were just saying, it's pretty cold here, but I hear it's just as cold by you, so it's good to see you, Mike.
The pleasure's all mine. First and foremost, you were originally booked to fight in April, and then all of a sudden, I believe sometime last week, that fight was scrapped and the Joe Pyfer fight was announced. Walk me through the schedule. What's kind of happened with this cancelled booking and then the new fight?
Yeah, and I actually just found out before we got online here that the guy I was supposed to fight, Abus Magomedov, is now booked to fight March 11th against one of my former opponents. Uh, man, no, it's escaping me. Mahmoud.
Muradov?
Yeah, Muradov.
Mm.
Yes. And I don't know how that happened because so originally I was supposed to fight Abus Magomedov, I think it was like February 18th or something like that. And I had just got down to Florida, so it would have been 2 months-ish out from the fight. And they called me and they said, hey, he's having visa issues. He can't get into Vegas. And I was like, all right, that sucks. So what are we going to do? And they said, well, they want to move the fight to the London card, March 18th. And I was like, well, even if he is having visa issues, he did fight in London at the exact same venues last September. So like it would have been 4 or 5 months ago, right? So I figured that was a safe bet. And I kind of, I thought maybe I should just stay down there and wait and see what happens. But I was like, okay, he fought there before. I got the contract, I signed it. I'll go back home for a little bit because I do my camps in Florida, so it would be hard to be away from my family for that long. Um, but I was like, all right, I'll change everything. I kind of ate the cost of like some of the rental car and like the Airbnb and all that I had set up, which I knew going in that's on me because I decided to train somewhere farther away, right? And then I get back and they're like, yeah, he's having visa issues. He can't get into London either. I'm like, okay, what the heck? Like he could just get in there a long time ago. And I don't want to make it sound like Abus is ducking me or anything. Like he's got so many fights against so many tough guys. I do not believe that's the case at all. The only thing I can think is that, he was legitimately having visa issues and then somehow they worked something out and now he's got cleared because now he's fighting March 11th in Vegas, which is originally where he couldn't get in before, which is kind of, strange to me unless, hopefully he worked everything out. But again, don't think he's ducking me, but it's just a sucky situation on my end. So, and at first, when I did move the first fight from February to March, I even asked my manager, I was like, am I guaranteed a spot on the February card if I don't want to move to March? And he said, no, it'd be just like, if somebody got hurt or something, they're not going to like struggle to keep you on that one because they want this fight to happen. So I moved it, to kind of help that matchup in the UFC out. And then I had nothing. And then Joe Pyfer actually messaged me on Instagram and he, volunteered himself. And he even said for March, he was like, hey, man, nothing but respect. You need an opponent. I'm down. I reached out to my manager. He reached out to his and they ended up making the fight happen. So, luckily now I got something on the books and, you know, better or worse, it's a little farther away, but it's a really, really big card. So I'm really excited to be on it. And I got an opponent that I know for sure can make the date.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask because obviously it's probably a more anticipated matchup in terms of fans. It's obviously on a pay-per-view. So I know you've had a couple of rescheduled bouts in the past, the likes of Ed Herman comes to mind. I can't remember a couple of the others off the top of my head, but you have had those in the past. So when you have this situation and the reschedule, the new bout is a better matchup, both in terms of name value and what it can do for you in the division. How satisfying is that to get that better opportunity, if you will?
It's awesome. You know what I mean? And I don't think that either guy is any less dangerous than the other, but for sure, like you were saying, I feel like at least stateside, right? Joe Pyfer has way bigger of a name, and some people, had kind of mentioned that, like, well, he's only got one fight. It's like, well, they both only have one fight in the UFC. Abus probably has a little more hype internationally, right? Because the Russians go hard for their guys. I know all too well. But on the other side, Pyfer, he's been in the Contender Series multiple times, and he looked really, really good in his UFC debut as well. And like you were saying, I agree. He's got way more hype behind him, you know, than Abus would have had stateside. And I think for a big card like that, to get on a big card, and have that name recognition, I'm, not super cool, but I'm kind of working my way up there. I'm getting a little more recognized as a guy who's been around a while, and even the people that don't get super, super excited about me personally. They know, even though I'm not maybe the same presence on social media as some people, and my interviews aren't like I'm talking crazy shit, my fights are always exciting. If nothing else, I'm always going to come to fight. Some guys will sit there and talk a big game and they'll point fight a 5 round decision. That has never happened with me ever. Even the decisions I've been a part of, there's a threat of the finish at all times, and there's some good ooh and ah moments. So I think it worked out for the better, and I'm excited to be on a huge, huge pay-per-view card.
100%. With that being said, though, obviously you had the original booking in February, then the potential for it being in March, and then now we're at the first week of April. How do you structure your camp so that you don't fall foul of burnout or anything like that, or overtraining?
So it was, other than like logistically getting everything set up as far as flights and everything like that, because I do train at Killcliff for like my quote unquote camps. It's kind of easy because I found out early enough. I was only at Killcliff for like a week, not even a week when I found out. So, I had just started. I didn't even really get to start to ramp up because, I got stuck in part of that Southwest group of flights that had all these cancellations in the US. And I didn't end up getting out to Killcliff, until like way later in the week than I had planned on getting there. And then by the time I got there, I only got a couple of days of training in, and I was just kind of greasing the wheels getting started. And then I found out right away that the fight had changed. So it's not like I was mid camp or anything. And I still train hard when I'm home, and I could certainly adjust some things at home to like train, harder.
Mm.
But when I'm back, it's more about maintenance, prehab, rehab stuff. I go down and get some work in with my guy Belal, and I can always do that more than I do just to like maintain. But I'm always getting like MMA rounds with him. I got some good guys in West Dallas at a place called Primal that I get some good jiu-jitsu and grappling with, and I'm still on my strength and conditioning. So I'm working out every day of the week, right? But it actually made it kind of easy to, mentally, I'm so used to stuff like this happening, it doesn't even affect me anymore. But physically, it was like, okay, well, I never got a chance to get going anyway. So now I just adjust accordingly and make sure my weight's where it's got to be, which is the most important thing, and go from there.
Perfect. If we talk about the opponent, Joe Pyfer, obviously, as you mentioned, a lot of hype coming off of the Contender Series, as you alluded to. Give me the stylistic breakdown. What is your scouting report on the upcoming matchup?
He's good. He's really tough. I think his wrestling is a little underrated because people see somebody do one thing well, they kind of automatically put him in that box. Like, you know, Piper's got a really good hook, and he does for sure. He's got a really good hook. He's got really good power. So they're like, okay, he's a big puncher and he's a knockout artist. Um, looking at his record, that's definitely true statistically. However, it's also complemented by the fact that he does have some legit wrestling. He comes from a school that has very, very good grappling and some high level grapplers. So he's not going to be a slouch on the ground either. He's a longer, lankier guy, which is probably why he favors that hook a little bit. And he's kind of a guy that, even though he walks people down, he hangs back and uses that length very well, and is good about, maybe not throwing punches and bunches and like true combinations. He's not going to guy that overwhelms you with the quantity of punches, but he's very good with shot selection.
Hmm.
And he's pretty good about doing the little stuff right, keeping himself just off the center line, kind of baiting guys to throw at him so he can counter with that big hook. He fought a left-handed guy in his last, or at least the guy that switched his last UFC fight. He did a really good job of threatening the middle to kind of open up his hook and then cracking him with the right hand and going back and forth between leading him into a hook and using a hook to lead him into a right hand. So watching him fight, he's definitely more of a boxer in that sense, but that doesn't mean he can't do other things. And I think it'll be a really interesting stylistic matchup because my striking kind of gets brushed under the rug pretty much every single time I go out to fight, no matter how good I look against, these world-class kickboxers. Um, but it'll be interesting because, I kind of like to fight in close. Last fight I fought at range.
Mm.
Pyfer seems to fight a little more at range. So, I would think if he's comfortable there, I'd probably have to pressure him in close, especially if I want to get the takedown right, because he's going to be very disciplined about not trying to take me down or go to the ground. Or if he does, it's going to be like takedown, not stall out, but get your frames, maybe a couple punches, and then get up if there's danger. So he's going to be really good at playing that jujitsu prevent. And I'm going to have to, again, be in a role where probably be a little bit shorter reach wise and height wise. So I'll have to do something to push the action in my favor and kind of get in close.
100%. You mentioned the last fight there against Bruno Silva. I do want to talk about that because rightly or wrong, I say wrongly, but rightly or wrongly, there was a lot of, let's say, shock or surprise online with your striking in that fight, particularly when you drop Silva, and obviously getting the third round submission is quintessential Gerald Meerschaert, so that doesn't come as too much of a surprise. But what did you make of the shock online and the surprise and the from fans and media that you were able to show so much of your striking off against, as you mentioned, such a world-class kickboxer?
I didn't really make anything of it. I knew that before the fight that was kind of the narrative, and I kind of figured that would happen after as well, where everyone was like, it was a lot less of I look good. Some people did give me credit. I will say this. It was a lot more 50-50 than I was expecting, because I was expecting for everyone to say it was all that Bruno Silva looked bad. And it was more like 50-50. They were like, Bruno Silva didn't look like himself, but Gerald also looked good. And I thought it was just going to be that Bruno didn't look like himself. And again, that was part of it, but I got a little more props than I expected. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier. People, you get put in a box. I have so many wins by submission, and people kind of ignore that, except for the commentators last time, Bisbing and Daniel Cormier, they very correctly pointed out that, yes, I have a lot of submissions, but I usually beat people up to get there, and they kind of coined their own term, club and sub. And, that is more the truth of it. Like, yes, I have taken guys down and submitted them before and looked like a pure grappler, but a lot of the time I win because I'm more of an all-around guy. And even if I'm not going to completely outclass you in one spot, I'll beat you in one spot enough to get me to the spot I need to win.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I did there. Is like, I did kind of forego staying on the inside with Bruno Silva because he's a big puncher, and I understood that when he sat down and threw, he was immobile. He would bend over at the waist and he couldn't catch me. And I knew that, generally speaking, kind of the turning and bailing and running away that I did on the feet is like a no-no. If you got a guy that's hinging at the hip and reaching for you so much, and you do turn tail and run once it gets dicey, they're never going to be able to catch up to you because they have to stand up straight first before they can effectively use their feet to chase.
Yeah.
So it's like, you got to understand the rules enough to break the rules once in a while. And I just knew that, especially watching his fight with Piera, that if you stand there and trade with the guy, he'll sling bombs and he'll eat a lot of shots. But if you touch him and move, it's hard for him to catch up with you. And now I'm not as tall as Piera, so me touching and moving, that's where like the whole matrix thing came in. I kind of had to touch him and lean back, or touch him and get out of dodge, because, my reach isn't longer and I'm not like 6'2" or whatever. So it looked a little bit funkier when I was doing it, but the principle was the same. And is it going to be like that against Pyfer? Probably not. Again, he's really good with shot selection. I think if I fought Pyfer the way I fought Bruno Silva, it would not work out that well, because he's a lot better about keeping his feet underneath him when he punches and not kind of coming out of his stance too much, and which allows him to like creep in off his punches. And he's so long and likes to reach with those punches that it would be dangerous. So I'm going to have a completely different approach on that one.
No, of course, of course. If we turn the conversation back to Pyfer for just a second, when I saw this fight was first announced, one of the first thoughts that came to my head was the similarity between potentially the your fight with Chimaev, and then this upcoming bout. And what I mean by that is, and I don't mean this in any way disrespectfully, but the UFC looking at it saying, let's give our up-and-coming, very highly touted prospect who's popular, Gerald Meerschaert, who if he's not what we think he is, or if he's not on his P's and Q's, Gerald will show that. Do you see any mirroring between the two situations at all?
Not even with that. That's just been kind of my MO in the UFC since I've been in there. And again, it's been no design of mine. It's just kind of like the role I've been put in. So even going back to man, I forget the Polish guy's name that I fought now, but you know, it was a first fight. Not Jocko, way before that. Way before that. Jocko's been around like I've been around, so that was a little bit different. But there was a guy that I fought, and he was like 11-0-1 at the time. He just got done knocking out somebody, and that was another instance where he was undefeated.
Oscar
and
Piotr?
Yeah, Piotr. That would have been, yeah. Because at the time, and now people forget this stuff because I'll beat a guy, and unless they keep on that rise, everyone just kind of dismisses it. So I fought Piotr when he was 11-0 or 11-0-1, right? And then you get guys, I'll get fights like Muradov, where he's another guy. When I fought him, he was 3-0 in the UFC and had knocked everybody out, and he was supposed to be the next big thing. I fought Chimaev, who was the next big, you know, on a much different scale than any of those other guys, but another guy who was the next big thing. So it's not unheard of. Even like when I fought Kevin Holland was still, you know, and he still is pretty hot and up and coming, but that was another instance where a short notice fight against a guy who everyone kind of wants to see on that skyrocket trajectory. So there's been more than a few times that I'm put in there with somebody that, you know, I'm kind of their like barometer for who's going to be like the next big thing or not. Now, of course, it's on me to keep beating those guys and like inch my way forward and try to get to that next level because, you know, I'm doing well in the UFC and everything, but I don't want to just be a gatekeeper, especially like gatekeeper for the top 15. Everyone wants to break through and get the belt. And I more than believe I have the skills to do that. But again, if that's what's going to get me there, that's fine. You know what I mean? And that's, again, this is another guy, 1-0 in the UFC. His last two fights are really, really good. And it's going to be, you know, does the hot new thing stay on that skyrocket trajectory, or does the crafty old veteran stop him in his tracks? You know, in his case, I think it'll be temporarily because I truly believe, you know, Pyfer's going to be a handful for anybody, just the size and the style he has. So, you know, I think, of course, I think I'm going to win, but I think as he gets more comfortable in the UFC and more fights under his belt, he's only going to get tougher to deal with.
No, 100%. Obviously, you're being very respectful to Joe Pyfer, and generally speaking, you're respectful to all opponents. I can't quite remember a beef that involved Gerald Meerschaert, to be quite honest. Having said that, I saw a little bit of a social media beef online with your training partner Belal Muhammad regarding potentially your credentials as a BJJ black belt. People who aren't aware, talk to me a little bit about this quote unquote beef.
Yeah, no, that was like the dad joke of all beefs. It wasn't even. Me and Belal have been friends for a long time. We've been training together since before he was in the UFC. And he recently got to go on the Joe Rogan podcast, and you know, one of the biggest media platforms period in the world. And hopefully this helps him, and the UFC sees this, because I think maybe he's kind of gotten sidelined out of some big fights because people think he doesn't have the hype, you know, necessary for some of these big fights. But he was the most viewed episode on Joe Rogan, to the point that the episode had to be taken down because it was crashing. Oh, sorry. They had to take the episode down because it was crashing everything, and put it back up at a later date. So like so many people were coming into that, and like I've never heard of that happening before, especially with another MMA fighter. So hopefully that, like, you know, clues the UFC in on how, you know, how popular Belal really is. But anyway, he's on Joe Rogan podcast, biggest show in the world right now, and he's talking about his fight with Damian Maia and how he had no black belts to work with during this entire fight camp. And later he was like, oh man, I was on camera and just started saying stuff, which I totally understand. It's a really big moment for him. I probably would have done the same thing, but it just made me laugh because it was like, I was there. There's you know, two other black belts that are there all the time that were specifically coming in to help him, right? That are part of Valley Flow, you know, just in general. And then he was like, yeah, it was just worked on defending takedowns. That was actually my advice to him, because I came in as someone who is a black belt, has a submission record at middleweight, and pretty decent at grappling, I think.
Mm.
And he was like, oh, what are we gonna do on the ground? And I was like, nothing. Damian Maia is an 80cc champion. Like, we could train just jiu-jitsu for the next 6 years. It's going to be really hard to catch up. Just don't let him take you down. I said, don't let him take you down, and don't let him connect his hands. You got great takedown defense. You got a gas tank that goes on forever. And, your stand-up's really good too, as we saw in the last fight. So I was like, don't let him lock his hands, and make sure we defend all the takedowns. And it worked like a charm. And I told him too many times, it's probably going to be a decision. Be okay with it being a decision. He is such a specialist, and like similar but different with the Wonder Boy fight, right? The smartest way to win this fight is don't chase the finish. If the finish comes, it comes. If it doesn't, you be so technically sound that there's no mistakes. You defend everything and you win. And that's what he did.
Yeah.
Is it the most, amazing thing to watch on film? From a flashy standpoint, no. But he was very technically sound. He did everything that was asked of him in training. It translated perfectly into the fight. And look at all the people who tried to deviate from that when they fought Damian Maia and either go into his realm or try something flashy.
Yeah.
They get taken down and they get submitted. So, for the greater good, you stay on your P's and Q's, and that's what happens. You win and you get yourself to bigger and bigger fights.
No, 100%, 100%. Last subject I want to talk about on this interview is a topic that's kind of making the rounds in the media cycle. I just want to get your blanket thoughts on the Dana White Slap League. What are your thoughts on the Slap League as a whole?
Okay, so I think the Slap League, let me give you an analogy first.
Okay.
I think the Slap League to MMA is like what like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette is like reality television, right? There's MMA is, it's definitely on the fringes still. It's getting more and more accepted by society, but it's inherently violent, but it's very compelling TV. But it's still a sport. It's a very real thing. It's, there's no scripted anything, despite what people may lead you to believe online, right? At least I've never been part of, throwing any fights, and I have the bank account to prove it. I can show you when I did and didn't get paid. You know what I'm saying? But I think the Slap League is a lot, it's a lot like reality TV. It's not scripted. I don't think they're just, you can't fake getting slapped in the face, right? But it's like the lowest denominator possible of what you could have for something that's a combat sport. There's no defense whatsoever. I mean, you could kind of argue, but like they're forced to stand there and just get slapped in the face. So personally, I think it's stupid. But I qualified that with what I said first, because I also think reality television is stupid. The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and now that doesn't have any bearing on how much money it could make and how popular it is, because obviously, like those other things I mentioned, it seems to be pretty popular. People seem to be watching it. At least now it's a new thing. We'll see as time goes on. But not everybody has the same likes and interests. So if there's a market for it, we'll find out pretty quick. And because Dana White's doing it and he's putting his name and his brand behind it, it's going to get eyeballs. And then if it is something that enough people like, it'll continue to be successful. And if it's not, it'll fall by the wayside. But I think if it is successful, I put it in like that reality TV category where it's like, there's nothing wrong with it. If two consenting adults agree we're going to stand here and slap each other, God bless you. More power to you. You do what you want. You make some money, that's great. Would I ever do it? No, not. You would have to pay me minimum 7 figures, and even then I'd have my apprehensions about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, bare knuckle is like brutal enough as it is. At least you have a chance to defend yourself. But standing there and letting the big old dude slap you across the face, I think is nuts, and it's just not for me. But if it's for you, you like watching it, you go right ahead. I have no problem with it existing, but it certainly will not get my stamp of approval.
No, I completely agree, and I actually think the analogy of reality TV makes total sense. Probably the best way I've actually heard anyone articulate it. So I appreciate you for that, and as well as that, Gerald, I appreciate your time today. It's always a pleasure to get some of your time and obviously preview this massive fight. And if we don't speak before, then I wish you the best of luck for UFC 287 versus Joe Pyfer.
Hey, appreciate you, Mike. Good talking to you.
Before we finish, Gerald, how can people find you on social media and any sponsors you'd like to plug? The floor is yours for the last word.
If you want to find me on social media, I'm sure if you like attempt to spell my last name, you'll find whatever links are there. I'm not as active as some fighters because I really don't give a shit. I'd rather you watch my fights than my social media. So if you want to follow me, cool. If you don't, that's fine too. Yeah, shout out to the UFC and Sucker Punch, my managers and everybody that helps me train, Primal, Kill Cliff, all those guys, all my buddies that I was training with at Rufus Sport for a long time. Shout out to all you guys too. Appreciate you.